The Medici went from humble bankers to one of the most powerful families in the world. It was their gold that financed some of the most beautiful works of the Renaissance, and the influence of their legacy still stretches well into our modern world. But how did it happen? I'm the Enlightened Edelweiss, and this is the third of a series of videos focusing on the history of this fascinating family. In medieval Europe, banking was dominated almost wholly by the Italians, with only the Catalonians as somewhat remote competitors. The reason for the Italian monopoly on banking lies, to a large extent, on their superior skill and business practices. As a matter of fact, many concepts and practices still used today have their roots in the medieval banks of Italy. Concepts such as partnerships, double-entry bookkeeping, the necessary apparatus to operate multiple branches across a wide geographical range, and much more are all innovations brought upon by medieval Italian bankers. Though it must not be forgotten that this was a time when the Catholic Church wielded enormous influence, and a key doctrine of the Church was the so-called usury doctrine. This prohibited the taking of any interest, regardless of whether that interest was high or low. Indeed, in Dante's famous Inferno, he does not describe a particularly enviable state for those engaging in usury. Naturally, in this case, the question must be asked as to how exactly banks were able to survive, let alone thrive in medieval Europe. How did they make any profit at all? The answer to this question lies in the fact that there existed a multitude of loopholes that banks could take advantage of in order to gain a profit that was not deemed illicit by the Church. The most common method of circumventing the usury doctrine was the use of exchange by bills, or cambium per letteras. This involved the negotiation of bills that were to be paid in a different place and in a different currency. Interest was included in this transaction and called a bill of exchange. Now, since this was technically an exchange transaction consisting of the buying of foreign currency and not a loan, it wasn't counted as usury, and therefore it wasn't an illicit transaction as far as the Church was concerned. Additionally, while charging interest was forbidden, charging a fee for damages such as the failure to repay a loan was not considered usury. This too was exploited by bankers of the time. Through such methods, bankers managed to evade the stain of usury upon their name, and, contrary to expectations, lived as respected members of society, oftentimes taking on key roles within it. However, another question that must not be ignored is how banks, specifically in Florence, were able to prosper under the tight regulations placed upon them by the guild system. In Florence's case, the arte del cambio. To this, it must be realized that while the guilds still held some influence over the professional standards and room for individual initiative, their influence was not as great as one might first assume, and banks within it could operate in a largely autonomous manner. Overall, while there were certainly some restrictions and artificial barriers to entry for medieval European banking, there were none that could not be overcome, and firms such as that of the Medici were able to flourish in this seemingly hostile environment, accumulating fortunes beyond one's wildest imagination.